Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in our series of talks promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So, today, in the spirit of celebrating the National Day of Spiritism, with one more anniversary of the publication of the Spirit's book on April 18th, tomorrow, we have a very special guests here representing main spiritist organizations in the United States. They will talk about Kardec. They will talk about the first book of the Spiritist codification, the Spirit's book. But before we bring our guests, I would like to just take a moment to prepare ourselves by doing our initial prayer. So, if you don't mind, let us just take a moment to connect. Let's connect with God, with Jesus, and all the spirits of light. And we ask, Dear Lord, Father, we thank you for all the blessings bestowed upon us. And in this day, so special to all of us, we ask that you inspire all of our guest speakers today during this live conversation. Inspire us. May we all be touched by the learnings and discussions of the day. And with that, we thank you. So be it. I'd like to take this moment to introduce our guests. Sonia Doi will be representing the Spiritist Medical Association. Dan Assisi will be representing the California Spiritist Association. Daniel Santos representing the Spiritist Societies of Maryland. Marcelo Neto representing the Spiritist Federation of Florida. Jussara Korngold representing the United States Spiritist Federation. And Peter Hayes representing the Tri-State Spiritist Federation. Hi, everyone. So nice having all of you here today. There's a lot of important information about the Spiritist book, and each one of you will talk for about 15 minutes, and we will share this information with us. Unfortunately, everyone will not be open for questions today, but please feel free to send us questions to the United States Spiritist Federation at the email info@spiritist.us so we can reach you in case you have any questions with a reply. I would like to start today with Sonia Doi. Sonia is the president of the Allan Kardec Spiritist Society of Maryland, U.S. Spiritist Medical Association, and the International Spiritist Medical Association. Sonia will talk about the scientific methodology used by Kardec to write the Spiritist codification. Sonia, would you mind starting the day?
It's my great pleasure, and good morning to all of you joining us for the celebration of the National Day of Spiritism. It's my pleasure to talk about the topic of scientific methodology used by Kardec. So let's start with the first slide, please. There we go. So I'm going to make just a quick introduction to scientific methodology. Research method refers to the manner in which a particular study is conducted. There are different types of research that can be done to assess those studies. Observational research is a non-intentional interventional type of research. Is based on observation and has been used in social sciences, in behavioral psychological studies. So, as the name says, is based on observation of the facts. And then there is experimental research that's a lot more known within scientific researchers, and that has also two subtypes, I would say. The laboratory research, which is done for medical research and so on, based on known data theories or ideas to test a new proposal. And that may be interventional, where you can control the conditions of the experiments. And it allows to draw a conclusion between cause and effect. But then there is empirical research that is based on data collected from observation. So that precludes a previous research using observation of facts. And then from that knowledge, we go into empirical research. Next, please. Well, to talk about Kardec's methodology, we have to start with young Hippolyte in 1815. At 14 years of age, he was sent to a prestigious school in Yverdon, Switzerland, which was founded and directed by then the famous Professor Pestalozzi, who had very advanced ideas in education and was very famous throughout Europe. At that time, the background was Illuminism, which was flourishing in Europe, and it was characterized by ideas of individual enlightenment, ideas centered in reasoning and science. So that's the background where Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivaillot was living. In 1822, after finishing his studies in Yverdon, Mr. Rivaillot establishes his career in education in Paris, and his career progresses very rapidly. He founded 2 schools, he was teaching various disciplines, math, grammar, science, and he wrote several education books. His education system was highly influenced, as we could expect, by Pestalozzi, and it was based on free thinking, religious tolerance, reason, and scientific knowledge. And this is actually, he mentions this in a small book that was a plan for public education, and it was published in 1828. So there he puts the basis of his methodology of study. He was highly interested in science and became a member of various scientific associations. Next, please. In 1854, he learned about the turning tables and reps. So if you remember, all started in 1848 here in Hydesville, but then it spread all over Europe. And he wasn't interested because he thought that was only for entertaining. He didn't have time for that. But in 1855, after being invited and refusing to go to these seances, he accepted the invitation of Mr. Patier, a friend who he considered to be a very serious man, very educated. So he thought, well, maybe, there's something there. He went to observe, and after close observation of the tables moving, jumping, he noticed that phenomena were not resulting for blind mechanical forces. But behind these movements and reps, there was some intelligent cause. He then questioned, what was the source and the nature of the intelligence that interacted with the participants? He was very attentive to every detail in his observations, and he considered all hypotheses, all possible causes that could explain the phenomena. Next, please. So he was very rigorous in his observation, and he wanted to rule out all alternative causes to actually see what was the possible cause. So he wanted to exclude possibilities of illusion, fraud, interference from the communicating medium himself or other participants in the seances. So he thought about charlatanism could it be charlatanism involved? And then after several observations, he noticed that there was no profit involved. And he says there's no charlatanism where there's no profit. So very unlikely that charlatanism is involved. And then he went to, is it possible to be forgery, fake? But then he observed that the phenomenon would be produced in different parts of the world, in different idioms, and the responses would have not the same form, but identical meaning. So he thought, how could something like this be forged exactly in the same way in different parts of the world when there was no connection like we have today? And what about illusion? And he thought that how can we admit that a large number of adepts of that time, he says in Spiritism, but it was people who believed that spirits were communicating, were all inept to distinguish reality and illusion. There were just too many people. It would be not possible that everybody was affected by illusion. Next, please. And I forgot to say in the previous slide, but actually all this, if you read the introduction to the Spirit's book, is all there. Kardec himself describes how he went on to analyze all these observations. So his meticulous assessment allowed him to notice, for example, that there were different calligraphy when different spirits communicated through the same medium. And a given spirit would show the same calligraphy when it manifested multiple times. So he was noticing things like this. He noticed that sometimes the responses given by the spirits were the opposite of what he was expecting or what he had hypothesized. So it could not be influenced by the minds. The level of knowledge in the responses were not consistent sometimes with the level of knowledge of the medium. So again, it could not be possible that the medium was influencing the response. So Kardec states, again, this is in the Introduction to Spirit's book, the study of Spiritism, as any other science, requires continuous, prolonged, and deep observation. These studies also require perseverance and patience. He says that all the time. Next, please. So Professor Revile, now under the pen name Kardec, wrote, again, I'm citing Introduction to Spirit's book. He has this statements. Ordinary science is in the realm of the properties of matter that can be manipulated and subjected to a design experimentation. The spirit's phenomena otherwise result from an external intelligence that has its own will and is not subordinated to our control. Therefore, observation and experimentation with spiritist phenomena require different approach from common investigations. So when a new event occurs and is not explained by known science, a new study needs to be developed. That's what he was doing, developing a new approach, a new type of study, because at that point, nobody had really studied these phenomena and he had no analogies to refer to. So he says those who want to master a science should study it methodically from the beginning and follow the development and sequence of ideas. Next, please. So now he goes, after observation, he goes to the experimental phase. And that's when he was using the empirical experimentation. So he used all that he learned through the observations and used conventional research principles to ask objective and serious questions in an organized manner. So he collected communications from more than 50 mediums who had different communication abilities that were from different locations, who didn't know each other. Some of them who would, because they were in different parts of the world, would mail responses to questions. And Kardec posed purposely the same question to various mediums and asked the question under different angles to test reproducibility. Next, please. So Kardec finally selected all the responses that were corroborated by reproducibility that passed the test of logic. So he really analyzed question and answer one by one to really see what was reproducing, what was repeatedly had a consensus. And he then organized in a very didactic manner into what we know today as the Spiritist codification. Many of the responses and information to which Kardec did not obtain corroboration was published in the Spiritist magazine, but everything that was corroborated, he combined and put in all the books that we know today as the codification of Spiritism. And most of the question and answers, as you all know, are in the Spirit's book. Next, please. So I would like to end with this quote, this actually categorical declaration of Kardec that is in the book Genesis, chapter 1, item 55, when Kardec affirms Spiritism marching hand in hand with progress will never be overthrown, because if new discoveries should demonstrate that is an error upon a point, it would modify itself in regard to this point. And if a new truth is revealed, Spiritism would accept it. I think this is a tremendous confidence that Kardec had in everything that he learned from the spirits and that he put together as Spiritism. So it's incredible the way how he organized all this. And to tell the truth, to date, I have never found a point where science and Spiritism diverged. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Thank you for your explanation of the scientific methodology used by Kardec. Now I would like to actually introduce our second guest speaker, and I would like to introduce Dan Assisi. Dan Assisi is a founder member of the Spiritist Institute and of the California Spiritist Association. He is the author of Our Road to Damascus and a host of the Spiritist Conversations podcast. Dan Assisi will speak about the introduction of the Spiritist book. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Marcia, and thank you everyone for being here today. It is truly a pleasure to be here with you and to talk about this incredible book, the Spirit's Book. I am so excited to spend some minutes talking about what I think is one of my favorite parts of the Spirit's Book, the introduction of the Spirit's Book. And you might have heard from Sonia the amount of thoughtfulness and depth and technical skills that went into bringing the book together. And in many ways, I think that calling the Spirit's Book a book is a misnomer. It really is an encyclopedia of knowledge. And I like to say that it really is a book like no other. When we look at our shelves, when we see the Spirit's Book there, and it takes the same amount of space of many different books, but spiritually speaking, it's a much larger work. It's a much encompassing theory on life and the world beyond. It's an incredible disciplined work of great minds, of different minds that take a structured approach to understanding our lives and the universe around us, and by consequence, arrive us at an ethical guide that really helps us understand things. It's truly amazing. It just really is amazing. And I think that it requires a special set of eyes to read it, because we're so used to reading different novels and different books that where we just go through it quickly without thinking about it. But the Spirit's book, it requires some sitting, some digesting, some reflecting. And so a great way to think about it is exactly by our study of the introduction of the Spirit's book. Because as Kardec masterfully starts the book, he says that for new ideas, new words are needed. And that is because the Spirit's book seeks to bring this new kind of thinking that Sonia was talking about, the scientific mind applied to problems of everyday life through the investigation of the spiritual. And that's why I like to say that the Spirit's book is a book ahead of its time, but not before its time. It is ahead of its time because it brings new concepts that only now, today, 164 years later, we are beginning to fully comprehend and see how fantastic and how incredible they can be in helping us understand ourselves and the world around us. But it's not before its time because it could not have come in a time before a period of enlightenment, a period of reverence to science and the scientific method and the thinking that allows us to look at life in an objective way to try to find meaning to our lives. It really adds a new layer. It adds a new layer of science and reason and philosophy and structured thinking to a field of knowledge, that of spirituality or religion even, if you will, in ways that we had not done before in our history as a society. And it's a fascinating thing. But because of that, because of this structured thinking, it requires a different way of looking at it. It is not a novel. It's not perhaps a book that you sit and you read in just one go. It's something that you go back to, you reference many times, you sit with, you think about. It is truly a work of art in many different ways. And to have a better sense of what really it is about and how it faces all these different challenges that it has ahead of it, I love to say that the Spirit's book, because Kardec himself decides to share with us right in the introduction, says that the important thing is clarity. And so all language that you see in the Spirit's book, it's not literary language. It's not meant to perhaps give you a poetic feel. It is supposed to be clear and concise because it mirrors this new way of looking at life, of understanding age-old problems with a scientific mindset. And so when we look at this, we really are trying to get the clarity of mind that Kardec brings to all this incredible body of knowledge, this incredible thinking that comes together through the work of hundreds of people, both on this side of life and also in the spiritual realm. So it is about, the Spirit's book is about being clarity into the world, being clarity into this new reality and this new existence that we begin to unfold, or shall I say, pierce the veil of, when we begin to really dive deeper into the matters that have challenged us for generations or for thousands of years. Who are we? Where are we going to do? Where are we coming from? What's really important to us? All those questions get addressed in many different ways in this book by many different people in a way that has not been done before. So this new approach really is fantastic and fundamentally different. And I really like to say and think that the Spirit's book introduces a science of the soul. All great minds align together to try to figure it out. Now that we have this new mindset, this new scientific ability, trying to figure it out, how is it that we can make sense of the world around us and who we are? And where are we going to after this physical life? And in the introduction of the Spirit's book, Kardec does a fabulous job of laying the tone for the entire book. In it, he starts by sharing what Spiritism is and why is it that he coined this new word, Spiritism, so that there will be no confusion with spiritualism, of which Spiritism is a part. but also because Spiritism brings these new ideas that have perhaps not been concatenated or brought together by different people. Kardec introduces us in the introduction, if I may say that, to reincarnation. He introduces us to mediumship. He introduces us to the idea of a divine justice. He lays down the tenets of Spiritism, or its core beliefs, so to say, or core points, I should better say, in a very straightforward way. He talks about the history of how he got to where he is and what are the things that lay ahead for us in our future. So it's not a small introduction. It's not a preface, as we are generally would see in another kind of book, where somebody comes in and says a couple of words about the book. It really is Kardec laying the foundation of everything that is to come, and because of this scientific thinking, and because of this scientific method that is employed now to the things of the soul, the science of the soul, we begin to see that this book goes beyond just sharing facts with us. It lays the foundation for us to learn how to find that information for itself. It is a capacity building book. It is a book that has come to teach us how that we can follow that same method, that same thinking, to arrive at the same solutions. It is a book that has come to teach us how to find meaning and purpose for our lives through our own inspection of the world around us. And so, while the book itself, it's a marvelous book because it presents us with incredible new content and new knowledge, what is most incredibly satisfying, at least in my perspective, it's the method which it introduces us to. I often say that the table of contents is perhaps the most exciting part of the Spirits book, and people generally look at me in a weird way when I say that. But I say that because in the table of contents and in the introduction, we begin to see the mind of the editor of the Spirits book, of Kardec, and all the incredible systematized thinking that went into crafting this book in this specific format. It is a book meant to teach us how to develop this new Spiritist method. And this Spiritist method, so to speak, of course, leverages the scientific method so that we can look at the matters of the spirit. And the method is a really interesting one. It's fourfold. First, it looks at the basic facts of the world around us. What are the pieces of information that are out there? What do we know for sure now that we have new ways of looking and acquiring knowledge through the scientific eye? And once we have these building blocks, how do we put them together to make a big picture of the world around us? And once we do that, once we have gotten these basic facts, once we have put them together in one cohesive picture of the universe, how do we go about navigating through them? What are the ethical implications of our actions in a world that is like that? And the fourth part of that is, what are the consequences of those actions? What does it mean if I behave in a specific way? What does it mean if I act in that other manner? It's an incredible philosophical approach to living in an ethical way. And it's incredible because it uses and leverages the scientific knowledge that Sonia so well spoke about, that in a way that it cannot be applied to our lives. You see, Spiritism is not just an abstract exercise in thinking or philosophizing about life. It is a method that we can use to understand the world around us, but also that we can apply to our own everyday lives so that we can begin to change ourselves in the middle of all of this. We too can leverage this method of looking for the basic facts, looking for the big picture, and understanding what are the ways in which we can behave given our circumstances. And finally, as we think ahead and plan our actions, we can also leverage what we know of the world to see whether the consequences of our planned actions are going to be the ones that we really intend them to be. It gives us a tool not only to understand the world, but also to start to plan our own lives and help us behave in a better way. It's a monumentous piece of work. It really is an incredible, incredible book that lays a foundation for a new thinking that 164 years ago began to be appreciated. But nowadays, in our world, 2021, as we celebrate the Spirit's book, we begin to see that this kind of thinking, which is innovative, which is evidence-based, which is open source, anybody can add to it. Anybody can add a new layer of beauty to that. It's truly contemporary and extremely useful. It is almost as if divinity had given us a tool 164 years ago before we truly needed it, so that when we got to a point when we need to make better decisions about the life ahead and understand that we are immortal spirits that transcend the physical body, we would already have that in place. And we do. And and one of the wonderful things about Spiritism in general is that it is so cohesive. It's so coherent. It makes so much sense because so much effort was placed by divinity in putting its pillars in place in such a way as to be sturdy and stand the test of time. And I say that because when you look at this method, when you look at this table of contents of the Spirit's book, which is divided in 4 parts, as you might have guessed, we also see that future works of Spiritism, or at least the Spiritist codification, the first 5 basic works of Spiritism, are going to reflect this structure as well. The Spirit's book is that basic fact. It's the place to start. It is where we find primordial information about the spiritual realm. We then build the big picture. We then start thinking about the spiritual world and how it actually interacts with us. And that is what we see in the Medium's book, the second book that Kardec publishes. And in the third book that Kardec publishes, The Gospel According to Spiritism, we find the ethical implications of our actions. We find the moral guidance of how to think about acting in a convoluted and complex world such as ours. And last but not least, we start to see stories, first-person narratives of how it is to act in this way and achieve certain results in the book Heaven and Hell. And it's really, really a brilliant piece of body of knowledge, of cohesion, of thinking that comes to us to introduce us to this new thinking, to this new way of looking at the world so that we can become better people, so that we can find the fulfillment that we have. So don't skip the introduction of the Spirit's book. We often do that with introductions, but in the introductions, and I know it's a rather large one as far as introductions goes, but it lays the foundation of everything that we are going to see in the book and why it is there. It gives us the big picture that we need to begin to understand the world around us, because the Spirit's book really is this incredible piece of knowledge, this foundation for this body of knowledge, for this new science of the soul that comes in. And it speaks first to our minds so we can understand things, so then that we can speak to our hearts in those moments of challenge when we don't know what the world looks like, when we feel perhaps forgotten or alone. We can remember the teachings that we first see in the Spirit's book and bring some solace into our hearts. So we hope that you enjoy the Spirit's book and that you also enjoy the wonderful information that my colleagues are going to bring to you about the different parts of the Spirit's book.
Thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate the explanation of the introduction of the Spirit's book. I would like to now call Daniel Santos. Daniel, it's such a pleasure to have you here as our third guest speaker. Daniel Santos is the co-founder and the current president of the Spiritist Society of Baltimore. He is the communications director of the United States Spiritist Federation. Daniel, thank you so much for speaking about Book 1 of the Spiritist book entitled First Causes.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, everyone. Good morning to everyone that is in the East Coast of the US. Good afternoon, good night to the other time zone. It's always a pleasure to be here and to share this information that we have been learned throughout this last 2 decades about Spiritism. And today, especially today, this weekend that we are celebrating the anniversary of the publication of the Spirits book. And I think Dr. Sonia Doy and Dr. Dana Sees did a great job introducing this book. Define the methodology, the scientific methodology that Kardec used to put all this information together, and the beautiful introduction that Dana Sees has just explained to us, how the codifier, Allan Kardec, has found a way to put this book. This is a book that's not a common book. If we study the Spirit's book, the way the book was put together is really a masterpiece. In Spiritism, the Spirit's book is considered the backbone of the Spirit's teachings. So this book is not Kardec's book. He was just the codified of the information that the enlightened spirits brought to him in that time, in the 19th century. So I would like to talk about the first part of the Spirit's book. As they already lay out to us, the book is comprised of 4 parts. The part 1 that talks about 4 first causes, the foundation, the basics, as he's mentioned. We have the part 2 that talks about the spirit world, or the world of spirits. The part 3, moral laws, and the part 4, hopes and consolation, that our friend here will discuss more about part 2, 3, and 4. But before bring what the part 1 discussing about, that is the first cause, I would like to just highlight a little bit how in the 19th century, someone that decide to investigate new phenomena would present those data to the community. So in the 19th century, the classical way to present a new science was basically, so first you need to define what would be the object of study. And then second, you investigate, you do the analysis of this object. And the third step would be formulate laws and see which kind of laws, rules the object of study. And the fourth, as they just mentioned, the deduction of the consequences of this law of the object being ruled by those laws. So if we look at the way Kardec put the Spirit's book in a didactical way, of course, we're going to see that Kardec follows very well this classical way to present a new finds. And he starts with, of course, the foundation that we find this in the first part of the Spirit's book that he named first cause. And pretty much he could not describe his finds that time without start with the foundation. The foundation would be the creator, would be who is the responsible, who is the manager of those enlightened spirit, who created this universe that we inhabit. So he starts by asking the first question that is about God. And let us just go back a little bit. Still nowadays, we as a humanity, we always question what is God, what is the nature of God. So, of course, this is old questions that throughout humankind, we has been questioning the origin of the universe and how things work. So Kardec start with those basic questions. And then one of the things that we learn in the first part of the Spirit's book is that in order for him to go and investigate more about the other subject, he needs to make clear what is God, what is the elements of the universe, and what is the creation. So that at first would be the object of study. And he needs to pick one to concentrate and to do the real investigation, the analysis of this object of study. So going back to the book one, the part one of the Spirit's book, we learned that the way that Kardec decided to start this book was through a philosophical approach, by asking questions. Okay, so the whole book is pretty much question and answers. And of course, there is comment by Kardec when he found appropriate to clarify some of the answers that was gave by the enlightened spirit. So in the introduction of this book, Kardec says something very important for us to understand. He said that in a specialized sense, the Spirit's book contains the Spiritist doctrine. So which means that this book has all the elements that we call Spiritism. So, and then of course he developed more in the other 4 books that we call the Spiritist codification. So the first book pretty much is made with, this is some curiosity, of 75 questions and answers. And so how they are divided, the first part of the Spirit's book? They are divided in 4 chapters. The first chapters talk about God, the second about the general elements of the universe, the third chapter of the part 1 talks about the creation, and the fourth about the vital principle that is related to all living beings that we have in the creation. So why Kardec decided to ask about God? And the first question we're going to read, a couple of questions. We don't have time to read all the questions, so I would like to suggest that I spend some time reading the book as many times as we can, because every time you read those questions is a new insight that we have. So the first question about what is God? So Kardec was very clear not to ask who or whom is God. So he just asked, what is God? And the enlightened spirit, beautiful, put an end, in many of those definitions that we had before about this anthropomorphic way to present God. And the enlightened spirit said, God is the supreme intelligence, the first cause of all things. This question itself, or this answer itself, is a way to put a stop and say, look, whatever you think about God, he's above that. Okay? So when we say supreme intelligence, is that it is the top. If you think that there is something after the top, then that after the top would be God. And the second part of the answer mentioned about the first cause of all things. And so this answer is pretty much the enlightened spirit answer to Kardec to tell, look, the first cause is the first cause. I mean, like, it's the primordial things. There is nothing, that you think that is before the first cause. If you think about that, that would be God. Okay, so this is very philosophical. We still have question about, okay, so if there is God, that there is the creation, what it is the creation per se. And that's why in the chapter 2, entitled The General Elements of the Universe, Kardec discussed about the knowledge of the origin of things, discuss about the 2 main elements that comprise the universe, that would be the spirit and matter. The spirit being these intelligent beings of the creation, and matter that would be necessary to help the spirit in the process of evolution. So also he discussed about property of matter and the universal space. Kardec asked about, okay, is the universe empty? There is empty space in the universe, and the spirit answered in question 35, no, there is no void, everything is populated. And regards to the spirit self, Kardec asked, what is the spirit? And the answer is the intelligent principle of the universe. So the spirit is a part of the creation that detains the intelligence that comes from the spiritual, the intelligent principle that by internship in different kingdom will end up one day to become a spirit. So that is a beautiful way that Kardec present those elements in the part one. And he either called the universal trinity, because these three elements, God, spirit, and matter, comprise the principle of all that exists. And the spirit and matter, by acting together, will define what we call the creation. So the creation pretty much is populated by these two main elements, the spirit and matter. And then Kardec go a little bit further in the chapter 3 for the first part of this, uh, uh, the part 1 of the book, the first cause, and discuss about the formation of the planets, the other part in the universe, the formation of living beings. He also discussed about, the population of the planet Earth. He brings some insights about what would be, that we know, that we learn from the Bible, about the figure of Adam and Eve. So I advise you to read that part. There is some biblical consideration about this topic that we have been learning about the first man created by God, how Spiritism see that part. And it's beautiful the way that Kardec and the enlightened spirits bring the explanation about the idea that the first man walk on earth was not Adam, okay? So they discuss about the plurality of the world and different races that has inhabit our planet. To finalize this chapter, the part 1, he brings the vital principle that is relate pretty much about all the necessity that organic life needed. So the difference between organic and inorganic beings, and the main difference is that the organic beings, they need to have this vital principle, and he explained that, the vital principle is a derivation, a specialization of the universal cosmic fluid, that is the primordial type of matter that will, by differentiation, give rise to the matter that we see, that our bodies is formed, that comprise the whole universe. And he finalized this part 1 of uh, the book, the Spirit's book, talking about the intelligence and instinct. That's something very important for us, because sometimes we mix a little bit about these two components that all living being has. From different kingdom has instinct, and when we reach the human level, we have what we call intelligence. And he finalized with the question, the part 1, with the question about um, um, why, if we have intelligence and we have reason that the other king doesn't have yet, so why this reason always cannot always be infallible, you know? And the Spirit answer allowed me to read. Kardec asked, why isn't reason always an infallible guide? Why? And the Spirit answered, it would be if it were not distorted by pride and selfishness and faulty education. Instinct does not reason, whereas reason calls for choice and endows human with free will. So we have the free will to decide to make our choice, but we also learn in Spiritism that whatever choice and decision we make, there is some consequence, right? So I would like to stop here. We still have other books to discuss, and I'll be here if any doubt arise. Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniel. So, as we continue a sequence of explanations, I would like now to introduce Marcelo Neto. Marcelo is the president of the Spiritist Federation of Florida. He's the president of Leal Publisher and of Feb Publisher. He's also the Vice President of Conscious Living Spiritist Group. Marcelo will talk about Book 2 of the Spirit's book entitled The Spirit World. Thank you, Marcelo.
Thank you very much, Marcia. Thank you very much for the brothers and sisters who presented beautifully this initial part of the this lecture that was very nicely put together with the Spiritist Federation of United States. Well, I had like a few things to say, but I don't want to be repetitive. And I sense all my previous folks brought like so beautifully the way that they explained the introduction, the scientific methodology, how Kardec puts all these work together. And Daniel Santos brought like this, the first portion, the first part of this beautiful book that I consider one of the most important interview in the world. This interview that was taking place with the two sides of the world. So the part 2, the book 2 of this book, The Spirit World or The World of Spirits. So there's a very interesting fact, because the Medium's book is an extension of this portion of the book and can be better appreciated after studying this portion that we are going to comment, we're going to bring to today. Of course, it would be like I will be very pretentious to try to bring everything that it's comprised in the second portion of this book, since it's the larger portion of this wonderful book that we call Spiritist book. It's from questions 76 through 613, divided in 11 chapters. It is this part of the book that that the veil will be lifted, presenting us with information pertaining to, just for example, it's right in the beginning, the origin and the nature of spirits, presenting us with information pertaining to our own origin. This is a question that has assailed the minds of countless individuals when they come to our study groups. You might maybe recall one day that you asked this question right in the beginning when you got in contact with Spiritism. Where do I come from? Where am I headed? Is there life after death? So among many other questions are answered in this portion, in this part of the book, the part number 2. So we start to get a glimpse into the world of spirits, our home, our final destination. I'm not talking about Star Trek. It's our final destination, because it is the spirit realm. So we learn and we can finally answer, is there a definitive line between the corporeal world and that of the spirits? This is a question that we pose, we ask ourselves, we ask the many people. So these are intriguing questions. They are answered in this portion of the book. So we learn about the different orders of spirits that comprise the infinite universe based on their individual degree of self-purification. Self-purifications as presented by high order spirits is the goal for each and every one of us, and can be attained, of course, through many reincarnations. We learned that there's no favoritism with God. No favoritism. I love Spiritism because it destroys racism. Destroys completely. What we were all created simple and ignorant, or unaware if you prefer. And that we are all given the same point of start. There's no favoritism. We all start from the beginning, right exactly each and every one. Of course, in different moments of our of this infinite universe. So we learn that how fast or slow we get to this state of purification, it's totally, entirely up to each and every one of us. Each and every one of us. So we learn here about the true aspects of free will, allows us to get out of any idea that we're victim of circumstances. We learn that we are all authors of our own destinies. It's quite empowering, Spiritism. quite empowering. There's like one question that comes to me. This is one of my favorite questions. The question 132. What is the purpose of incarnation? This is what Kardec asked to the benevolent spirits. And they answer, God imposes incarnation for the purpose of leading spirits to perfection. So we are all destined to be perfect, relatively perfect. We're not going to be equal to the Creator. So it is in this part of the book that we will learn also about different aspects of reincarnation. So there's one question that was placed on the family conversations from beyond the grave. This was, you can find the Spirit's Review of May 1858. The Spirit Society of Paris had the opportunity to interview Mozart, the Spirit, of course. And in this interview, they asked him, why was there a need for us to reincarnate? Why not just simply remain as discarnate spirits? Because this the young people said, well, wait, why do we have to come over here? So this is a question many have posed in our study groups at the Spirit Centers, for which Mozart answered, we would stay stationary. We ask for the reincarnation in order to progress towards God. This was the answer from the Spirit Mozart. So reincarnation then is founded on the principle of continuous evolution. Some people have stated, I did not ask to be born. You know, our sons and daughters, you know, the youngest usually say, I didn't ask to be born. Yes, you did. Sometimes we begged. And the planning around our reincarnation, the investment made on our behalf, truly demonstrates God's infinite love for all of us. How often prior to learning about Spiritism have we sometimes roamed around feeling unloved, misunderstood, feeling like victims, even worse? Sometimes we say, like, I'm an orphan from God. I heard this many times. So this is where Spiritism shines, especially in this portion of the book. And understanding about the second part, studying it, reflecting it about its context, allow us to see that we are immortal spirits. We're not going to be ended. No, there's no end for us. Also, we can see in this portion of the book, this is one of the questions that I love very much, and I know you guys already used this question so many times in so many works, so many lectures that you probably delivered throughout the world. It's the question 171 that talks about the justice of reincarnation. On what is the doctrine of reincarnation based? And I am going to read just a portion because it's a pretty big answer. On the justice of God and revelation, we will repeat this to you over and over. A good father always leaves the door of repentance open to his children. But you can go ahead and see the whole content of this answer. It's beautiful. All of us are en route towards perfection, and God furnishes us with the means of accomplishing it through the trials of corporeal lives. You will see in this portion of the book. Out of the divine justice, God allows us to accomplish in new existences whatever we could not do or complete, maybe in this one, or maybe in the previous existences. That's why reincarnation, it's crucial for all of us. There's also a comment placed by Kardec in this question 171 that I would like to read. It's Kardec's comments. It says like this: those who are aware of how imperfect they are derive a consoling hope from the doctrine of reincarnation. If they truly believe in the justice of God, they cannot expect to be equal for all eternity to those who have done better than they. The thought that such imperfection will not exclude them forever from the supreme good, and the fact that they will be able to reach it through continued effort supports them and renews their courage. Who at the end of one's career does not regret having acquired a particular experience too late to have profit from it? This lately acquired experience will not be lost. However, it will be of benefit in a new existence. This is beautiful. This is truly beautiful. In this portion, we can also see materialism is also introduced in this part of the book as well. And Kardec offers some pretty profound thoughts around this topic. It is true that Spiritism contributes towards progress as a whole, because its contribution resides in destroying materialism, which is one of the source of society. This is something that I memorize. It's not my words. This is Kardec's words. So we can understand this statement by reflecting Kardec's comments about this topic when we also review, for example, his own comments on question 148. And I made a little adaptation of this question, because the question 148 says what if materialistic ideas prevail? And Kardec brings us this. People would see nothing in the human body except an electrical apparatus. They would see life extinguished many times by a ruptured artery, but would perceive nothing except that artery. They would try to discern whether or not there might be something else, but they would find nothing but inert matter. Moreover, since they would not have seen the soul escape or been able to capture it, they would conclude that everything rests in the properties of matter, and thus, after death, the mind is reduced to nothingness. These are comments by Allan Kardec. So this would be a very sad conclusion. Imagine a world where all of this was the truth. People would be simply justified in thinking only in themselves and placing the satisfaction of material pleasures above everything else. Social ties would be broken and the affections would be destroyed forever. Kardec then stated beautifully also about this. I'm reading a lot of things, yeah? It is usually stated that no one has ever returned to give us an account of what exists over there. My father used to say that. That, however, is an error. And Spiritism's mission is precisely to enlighten us regarding that future, to enable us to see and touch it to a certain extent, no longer through reason only, but through actual phenomena also. Thanks to spirit communications, the matter no longer involves pure speculation. Instead, it is a reality that has shown its face to us in that actual beings from beyond the grave have come to tell us about their situation there and what they do there. They have allowed us to watch, so to speak, the events of their new life, showing us the inevitable fate reserved for all of us according to our own merits or our own wrongs. Words of Allan Kardec in this portion of this book. We can see beautiful things in this book. Many, many beautiful things in this portion of the book. We can also say, does the spirit feel pain when it dies? Does a spirit immediately meet those who it knew on earth and who died before it? This is a question that you can find in that book, in that portion of the book. Does an understanding of Spiritism have any influence of the state of the soul after death? What about when we find ourselves back home in the spirit realm and in the spirit life? What are the perceptions of us, our spirit? What exactly happens there? What are sensations? Beautiful, beautiful things that we can see. I'm trying to remember a few questions that we can find in that portion of the book. There's also, we are invited to learn about the intervention of spirits in the corporeal world. You will see this in question 459. They have any influence in our actions? Are we guided by the spirits? We influence our spirits. So how exactly is this influence? How exactly this kind of things are dealing? How we deal with that? So many are afraid of obsessions. I am sometimes. I have to be vigilant. So we are afraid of possessions. But once we got instructed, once we are aware of this reality, we pay much more attention, and we simply thank God that we have the ones that already passed to the other side of life, that love us very much, our guardian angels, our protector spirits, sympathetic to us, guiding us, inspiring us. We are not alone. We all going to see in this portion of the book. Of course, many other questions. I will be very. It's impossible. So this my brief introduction to this portion of the book. The part 2 is dive into this portion of the book, but dive into all portions of the book, and you will see life is beautiful. I'm not the director of the movie. Life is beautiful. I just read something yesterday, but life is beautiful and God loves us. It looks like a cliche thing, but it's not. There's much more for us to understand and to dive in, especially in this part number 2 of the book. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and let's keep on.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you for your enthusiasm about book 2 of the Spirit's book. Hope all of you take this opportunity, if you have not done so, to spend some time reading book 2. But we have to move on. So I would like to take this time to call our 5th speaker, Jussara Korngold. Jussara is the General Secretary of the International Spiritist Council, the President of the United States Spiritist Federation, and the Executive Director of the Tri-State Spiritist Federation. She is also the founder and president of the Spirits Group of New York. And Jussara will talk about book 3 of the Spirit's book regarding moral laws. Thanks, Jussara.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, everyone. It's been such an enlightening morning here talking about the Spiritist book with the celebration of the National Day of Spiritism on behalf of the United States Spiritist Federation, and remembering Kardec, remembering all the work, and above all what represents this work in our life. It's very important, and this is how I would like to start highlighting my topic today, talking exactly about the expectations that Kardec had in relation to Spiritism. He always mentioned that, or quite often he would be pointing out that Spiritism is not just a matter for us to be involved or thinking about, its scientific, philosophical, or even moral aspect, but for us to use all of this and to put it in practice in our lives. So all the knowledge, all the understanding, everything that we gather from all this text that we have from Spiritism is with an aim of bringing us to moral consequences. That's why when we talk about the Spirit's book, the third part of the Spirit's book, it is so incredible when we think about how short it is, and but at the same time how grandiose it is, and it represents for us, for our life. So that's the reason why we call it a moral treatise par excellence when we talk about the moral laws. But let us look at some curiosities. At this point, we have already gone through the first three parts plus introduction of the Spiritist book. So just for us to have an idea, of course, we all know that the Spiritist book has 1,019 questions, but there are sub questions as well, as we can see here in first part, second part, and the third part, that is the one that we are going to be focusing. It's composed of 306 questions and 42 sub questions, and it is also in this part that we find that so important answer that we receive it from the spirits when Kardec asks which would be the one that would represent the guide and model for us, and the answer from the spirits is this is Jesus. So there are many curiosities, many important things for us to dig even deeper when we are talking about the study of the Spirit's book. But let us look at the moral laws. The moral laws, we can divide them in three groups. And these groups would be divided in terms of us understanding what would be our individual's duties towards God, to oneself, and to others. So in terms of the individual duties that we would have towards God, we can find all the explanation, the clarification from the spirits, the guidance in the chapter that deals with divine or natural law and law of worship. And we will see that a bit more in details in a while. Let me talk about now about the laws that has reference to us in how to deal with ourselves. So we are talking about the law of labor, reproduction, preservation, destruction, and perfection. And in relation to others, the law of society, progress, equality, freedom, justice, love, and charity. Justice, love, and charity. That is actually the crowning of all of them. So when Kardec writes this part of the Spirit's book, he thought it was not even enough that he had to expand like he did with all the other parts. That's, sorry, subsequently gave us the other 4 books of the codification. And in this case, he writes a book to explain the moral law that he developed into a third part, that is the gospel according to Spiritism. So he thought it was very, very important for us to deeply understand, because this is what is going to change us. This is what is going to help us in this process of transformation. So, as we can imagine, all these 3 parts that we divided to the duties in relation to God, to oneself, and to others, can find the equivalent chapters in the Gospel according to Spiritism, as we can see here, and we will be talking more in terms of the chapters that are related to our duties to God, to our duties to oneself, and to our duties to others. So let's look a little bit in each one of them. The duties to God: do not think that I have come to abolish the law. My kingdom is not of this world. In my Father's house are many rooms. One cannot serve God and mammon. Faith can move mountains. Ask and it shall be given you. A selection of Spiritist prayers. all of those chapters guide us in our most important relationship, which is the one that we are going to have between ourselves and God, the respect that we have to God, understanding that the natural law is the law of God and is the only one, like we see in this question of the Spirit's book, that can ensure happiness to us. And explaining that all the laws of nature are divine, and because everything comes from God. We may, from time to time learn how to deal with laws that always existed. For instance, the law of gravity was always there, but we needed Sir Isaac Newton to come and show it to us, the more or less for us to understand things. But that is the law of God. Everything is related to God. And most importantly, when we talk about the law of worship, telling us, and at this moment is very important for us to highlight this, that the worship exists in the heart. Many people are missing the Spiritist center, the embraces. Of course, we all are. But in terms of our relationship with God, we just need a heart willing to make this connection. Always remembering that God's eyes are always watching us, which can be kind of hard sometimes for us to think about it, but we never lose the connection. But we can feel more the connection if we allow ourselves to do that. So when we talk about the duties about ourselves, the law of labor, how it helps us to grow, to develop, the reproduction, the preservation, the destruction, and the moral perfection, which is something that we have to strive to attain in this earth. And the chapters that we see in the Gospel according to Spiritism, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Blessed are the afflicted, the poor in spirit, the pure in heart, the meek and the peacemakers, the merciful. Be perfect. As strange morals that gives us explanation about some that may seem contradictory teachings from Jesus. Seek and you will find, because heavens will help those that help themselves. And when we talk about these duties to oneself, in terms of being perfect, in terms of growing, in terms of learning, of course we have to talk about the Beatitudes, where we learned the basic virtues to help us in this process. And all this process can be achieved, like it says here in chapter 4 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, which is through reincarnation. And finally, when we are talking about the moral laws as well, in relation to our duties, our relationship to others. So we live in society. So the law of society, the law of progress, the law of equality, the law of freedom, and the law of justice, love, and charity. It is very important for us to remember that we live in society because we are interdependent. We have to learn from each other. We have to help each other in this sense. And in the Gospel according to Spiritism, Christ is the first one to give the example of the love, justice, love, and charity, when towards his love and demonstration of charity towards us, he represents to us the consoler. And he talks about bringing the consoler and all the things that could help his brothers and sisters in this pathway of self-improvement. Loving our neighbor as ourselves, our enemies, doing good for the sake of good, not because we want to show up about, whether we are doing good or not. Honoring those that brought us to life, that gave us the opportunity to be here. Practicing charity as one of the main mottos in Spiritism. Without charity, there is no salvation. Many are called, but few are chosen. Bless our workers. So important for us right now, because this is the last hour, the last moment that we are having to contribute for the changing and the transition of our world. Being aware of false Christs and false prophets, because there are many things that can bring us illusions that pertain more to the material field of life than truly the spiritual side of life. And not separating what God has joined it in so many aspects, not only in terms of marital life, but in so many aspects. And always remembering to bring light. Many of us, of course, we will say, what light do we have? Perhaps not such great light, but it's still, we all have something to give and to assist. And this is what this chapter is all about. Your light is flickering, it's a very small one, it doesn't matter, it's still, let it shine so that it can make an impact in the lives of others. And always remembering that all these blessings that we have received, especially the blessing of understanding Spiritism, of having all this understanding and knowledge, it has to be shared, and it's to be shared without any kind of involvement of financial gains on our part, because we all know that every time that we are representing Spiritism, we are being guided and assisted by the spirits. And so therefore, let us just be faithful messengers in this message of spreading love and enlightenment. And finally, one thing that when Kardec opened the Parisian Society of Spiritist Studies, in his addressing, he said the following: what does it matter to believe in the existence of the spirits if that belief does not make the one who has it become better, more benign, and indulgent towards one's fellow beings, more humble and patient in adversity? That's why for us to pay attention, especially at this moment, in the gospel, in the moral laws, the third part of the Spirit's book, it's so important. It is without a doubt our path, our journey in improving and making all these changes that are necessary. We are very thankful for this opportunity and for our brothers and sisters that spoke before us. And in this way, we can have just, some brief highlights of the Spirit's book, because this is a work for us to study during many, many lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jusara. Before I bring our sixth and final guest speaker, I would like to just take a brief moment to say how happy I am with today's live talk. It is indeed a very special day because we have come here together to celebrate the 164th anniversary of the Spirit's book and the National Day of Spiritism. Thank you, all of you who were able to watch this live talk, as well of all of you who have been following our weekly talks. I want to remind you to join us next Saturday, April 24th at 11 a.m. Eastern. Susana Simões from Florida will be talking about mastering relative happiness. I would like to also take the opportunity to remind everyone of the upcoming Spiritist Symposium. This will take place next June 5th and 6th with the topic mediums and mediumship. So now I would like to conclude our presentation today, this series of talks regarding the Spirit's book, by asking our good friend Peter Hayes to present. Peter is the president of the Spiritist group Love and Light in New Jersey. He's also one of the executive directors of the Tri-State Spiritist Federation. Peter Hayes will present the book 4 of the Spirit's book that is entitled Hope and Consolation. Peter, before you begin your presentation, I'd like to take this moment to also invite you to close our presentation with a final prayer. Thank you.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here, and thank you to all of my colleagues. So why is part 4 of the Spiritist book called Hope and Consolation? Well, both of these words are optimistic. And our capacity to achieve hope and consolation is really based on living through the joys and sorrows that all of us must experience. Question 1012 has a really nice quote I'm going to share with you. The joys and sorrows of spirits are inherent to their degree of perfection. We could think of part 4 of the Spirit's book a little bit like this. At times, life is absolutely hard. Other times, life is absolutely wonderful. But we are not here just to be miserable, and we're not here just to enjoy life. We are here to learn. And how we handle our efforts to learn really depends on us. Part 4 starts with question 920, and it ends with question 1019. Just saw to mention 117 questions when you include the sub-ones. Chapter 1 is earthly joys and sorrows, and chapter 2 is future joys and sorrows. Future meaning the joys and sorrows we experience in the spirit world. In chapter 1, it makes the basic point that life on earth helps us to learn. We cannot escape the trials that we go through. We can, however, delay them. We can only really achieve happiness after we resigned ourselves to the experiences that take us through our lives. For instance, what is it like to live with relative happiness and unhappiness? What about experiencing the loss of loved ones or experiencing the ingratitude of friends? What about the antipathy, in other words, dislike or aversion that others might have towards us? Many of us have a big fear of death, and some of us, unfortunately, have a huge distaste for life to the point that it can lead to suicide. All of these are the major themes of chapter 1, and I'm just going to make a few brief comments on some of them. Perfect happiness on earth, it doesn't exist. Why? Because we would not learn anything. We can really only our happiness really depends on what we have earned by learning how to reduce wickedness within ourselves. Often, we are the architects of our own unhappiness, and this occurs when we often disobey God's laws and deviate from the right path. So you might ask, well, what's the right path? If we do our best to follow the example and the wisdom and teachings of Jesus, and for example, much of the content of the Sermon on the Mount, that will go a long way to putting us on the right path. In other words, when we try to practice the good to the best of our ability. A lot of times the problems that we experience are proportional to the artificial wants that we create for ourselves. So by doing what is good, by practicing the good, we often will surpass these artificial wants, which are really illusions to begin with. The loss of loved ones is very difficult, but the general point that's made is that when we are able to let go of those close to us, especially when it's for the best, we will be able to help them and help ourselves as well. Experiencing the ingratitude of others is really painful, but we must always remember and do our best to pursue the good no matter how we are treated in return. And if we resent people for not having gratitude, then really all we're doing is demonstrating that happiness does not occur if we harden our hearts as a result of that. This was touched on by Marcelo earlier. What about antipathic relationships? Well, love, for example, really hurts when it's one-sided. But here's the thing. A lot of times we have a distortion about what love is. If we have love that's more physical, for instance, and our affection is more physical, well, that's fine, but it doesn't last. But if we have love and affection that's more from the soul, that can last. The fear of death is normal, but it is not necessary, especially when we practice the good. If we question 941, for instance, emphasizes how we can overcome our fear of death through faith, hope, and charity. Here's a really nice quote that I want to share with you. It goes like this: "Death should not instill fear in virtuous persons, because with faith they have the certainty of a future life. Hope leads them to expect a better life than the present one, and charity, which has guided their actions, gives them the assurance that they will not encounter anyone that they may have reason to dread in the spirit world." This introduces the idea of thinking and planning for the future. And that is certainly connected to the last part of chapter 1, which is that difficult subject of suicide, when people want to give up and cannot overcome their sorrows. I'm just going to make a couple quick points. Nobody wants to go through sorrows, of course, but at the same time, we cannot escape them. And suicide does not resolve our suffering. In fact, it could make it worse. The consequences we experience after suicide often depend upon our intentions and the level of awareness we have. But in any case, it is touching upon the subject of the future and what it means to plan for the future. In chapter 2, Future Joys and Sorrows, it emphasizes that we experience in the spirit world, and what we experience depends on the consequences we have created for ourselves here on earth. And these consequences are examples of God's laws, which are the invisible framework that govern our lives, whether we're aware of this or not. Shasada, of course, elaborated on this subject in great detail. We become aware of God's laws more when we practice the good. And God's laws apply to everybody because God is concerned with everyone. This is a major emphasis that Spiritism makes. For example, the cause and effect. Well, the law of cause and effect is really not about punishment, but rather it is there for us to realize that there are limits and consequences to our wrongdoing. That's hopeful, because we can free ourselves when we begin to do what is right. And this might not be hard to understand, but it does require the wise use of our free will. And of course, we must be very determined in order to carry out our free will wisely, which is sometimes not so easy to figure out. The more awareness we have, generally speaking, the more responsibility we become for our actions. In other words, we really cannot cop out by blaming others for the things that happen to us. But it is encouraging that any consequence that we go through, no matter how difficult, it's only temporary. And consequences are proportional to our actions and the intentions behind those actions. It's like this. We have some control over what we experience. A lot of times it seems like we don't. But here's the thing. We have more control over how we experience what happens to us and how we choose to process it. Part 4 of the Spirit's book begins to wind down by focusing on some comments about the Bible. And generally, it's something like this. We internalize hope and consolation a little more easily when we understand that the wisdom of the Bible, some of the wisdom, is allegorical and metaphorical, not literal. In other words, don't take everything we read in the Bible literally. This point is one of the major inspirations behind the third book in the codification, The Gospel According to Spiritism. And I'm just going to mention a couple of examples. Believing in a vindictive God who just doles out everlasting punishment, well, that goes against common sense. It negates God's goodness, and it causes people to lose faith in God or become atheistic. We humans have misunderstood this point in the Bible. Let's not forget, we're prodigal children. No matter how much we rebel and suffer as a result of our rebelling, we will be welcomed into God's arms when the time is right for us. Why is that so? Because God knew we were going to rebel. It's in our nature to rebel, but it's also in our nature to surpass rebelling. Another example, the resurrection of the body. Is that literally correct? Well, science tells us that it is impossible for a dead body to resurrect. And Kardec reminds us that we must always follow science. But the resurrection of the body, if you think of it as more of a figure of speech or a symbol of reincarnation, that can make sense. Places like heaven and hell and purgatory are really just symbols. They're not permanent places that we can never ever get out of, as it were. In the spirit world, we experience truth more vividly, even if we happen to be trapped in some kind of illusion, let's say in a temporary illusion. In other words, what we experience is a reflection of who we are at the moment, and it will change over time. So, and one of the reasons for that is, I'm going to repeat what I said before in question 1012. The joys and sorrows of spirits are inherent to their degree of perfection. Part 4 has a nice way of wrapping things up. And one of the things it says is that whatever our joys and sorrows may be, God's judgment is fair and wise. And we must remember that even when it's slow, change is part of our nature. We don't stay the same forever in terms of our spiritual progress. The last question in the Spirit's book is question 1019. And it ends with a lot of optimism. And it talks about the regeneration of the planet. And I'm just going to share with you one little quote from that question. It goes like this. Goodness will reign on earth when the good spirits come to live here and outnumber the bad ones. They will usher in a reign of love and justice, which is the source of goodness and happiness. Through moral progress and adhering to God's laws, humanity will attract good spirits to earth and will keep the bad ones away. However, the latter will not definitively leave earth until its people are completely free of pride and selfishness. In other words, it's up to us. The more we overcome pride and selfishness, the more we begin to free ourselves. Emmanuel, in chapter 11 of the book Our Daily Bread, puts it a little bit like this. If we overcome pride and selfishness, we will never tire of working for the good. That's a great quote. And this is one way to appreciate how hope and consolation really depends on us. And the more we take responsibility and the more we do our part, the more we will receive support over time. I'll put it to you another way, in an expression I'm sure you're all familiar with. God helps those who help themselves. Thank you. And I'd like to thank everyone who presented before me. And I would like all of us to join together in a final prayer. So please let us all close our eyes if it is safe to do so. We thank you, dear God. We thank you, dear Master Jesus, for your presence. We thank you for this beautiful day, and we thank you for the beautiful opportunities we receive each and every day. Help all of us to internalize the wisdom you make available to all of us. May all of us understand that we are only in this moment of time, and it is just one moment of time of eternity. May we all come together as brothers and sisters. May we surpass the identity we have at the moment and look forward into the future as we are united through fraternity, through love, through compassion. May all of us be connected by our higher selves. Please bless the journeys that each and every one of us is on, and may each and every one of us do our best each day to grow and to learn and to choose life. Amen.